Augustana. I'm Intern Pastor Michael Poeschl, and welcome to this week's Bible study, our Engage and Reflect. We'll be looking at the text from Exodus chapter 32, verses 1 through 14, the story of the golden calf. And before I get into reading that for you, I will set a little context. Starting in chapter 19 of Exodus, we finally have the Israelites reaching the foot of Mount Sinai with Moses. At this point, Moses goes up the mountain, and this is where he is going to receive the instructions and commandments that are going to be so important leading the Israelites forward. But also while this is going on, we have our story and our reading for today having to do with the golden calf. So beginning with chapter 32, I will read us verses 1 through 14. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from them, formed it into a mold, and cast an image of a calf. And they said, "These are our gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord." They rose early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once. Your people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I commanded them. They have cast for themselves an image of a calf, and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, 'These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt.' The Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone, so that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And of you I will make a great nation.' But Moses implored the Lord his God, and said, 'O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath, change your mind, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, how you swore to them by your own self, saying to them, 'I will multiply your descendants like the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever.' And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people." It's very interesting in this reading how right off the bat, in the very first verse, we have where the Israelites have chosen to break the very first commandment. That covenant is threatened with God of having, "You shall have no other gods, and there shall be no other gods that go before me." And also the third, "You shall not make yourself a graven image." In that one instant, we have this action of the Israelites out of the response to Moses being gone. This journey they had been on, roughly 40 days from some of the studies, through wilderness, through darkness, God had been providing them. God had been guiding them. And suddenly there's this sense that with Moses up on the mountain, with God, which they weren't able to approach, we have this fear. And so quickly do they turn to Aaron. And it's also interesting with Aaron that his choice is to go right ahead and make this idol, make this golden calf. So there's some things that we need to think about there, even in our own lives, and when we relate to this text, of how often do we turn to our false gods, our idols, when we're maybe feeling unsure or afraid or seeming distant from God. Because when we do turn to these idols, the distance increases between ourselves and God, and that false sense of security we get from perhaps money, cars, you name it, turns us away from that very promise and that very love of God. And that is key to this passage. After all of these things these people have gone through, and if we remember our text from last week in the Passover of being finally released from this bondage and slavery in Egypt, they've been set free, but this wilderness experience has perhaps shaken them to the core. Even in that, they decide that they're going to have this party, and this party gets to be way out of control. Ironically, God is there with Moses. God sees this. God senses this, feels what's happening. And when we get into that, verse 7, quite clear. The Lord said to Moses, "Go down at once." You can feel the anger. "Your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have acted perversely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I have commanded them." Then he goes on to state exactly what the Israelites said as far as having the calf, worship these gods. And there's interesting there in that language when you pick up your people, they belong to you. There's that distance that we can pick up and notice between God and ourselves when we turn and look the other way. But Moses is also there to respond to God. We have this special relationship between Moses and God, where in that anger, Moses is able to appeal to God, and in a sense, not bargaining with God, but restating what is so important of taking ownership and responsibility for God's people. Moses reminds him, says in verse 11, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people?" So there we have that turnaround where God was saying, Moses, they're your people. Now God is saying, Moses is saying, they're your people. So it's back on them. "Whom you brought out of the land of Egypt." Remember, it's that piece from the Passover of remembering what you went through, what God has led you through, with great power and a mighty hand. And then appealing to the sense, well, what would the Egyptians say? What will all these other people, as it looks like you're reverting back to these former gods, not acknowledging God and allowing God to be all-powerful, to God to be God. So Moses encourages him. He appeals, turn from your wrath. Such an interesting piece that Moses is telling God, in a sense, asking God to do this. Don't do what you're saying you're going to do. Change your mind and do not bring disaster on your people. And exactly that happens. God changes God's mind. So we do have a relationship with God when we're in communication with God. And that is what's so important with this reading. And in verse 14, "And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people." So in that is this guidance when we are faced with fear and concern, how we can turn back to God, to trust God, even when we're not sure of where we're going and where we're at. But knowing that God knows our hearts and God knows that we love him. And in turn, we will do those things to love each other. I thank you for listening. I encourage you to read more of this. It's a nice clean break at 14 because starting at verse 15, a lot of different things happen. So I encourage you to read that, and I look forward to delivering my sermon for you on Sunday. Thank you.